Greg talked about this. The tip that Josh gave him about how to set up and like crack your wrist, check your watch, and blah blah blah. So I think when I tried that setup, it was pretty successful. It's a little bit odd to kind of set up that way all the time. So I don't do it that way all the time, every single practice match, because I feel like purposely stressing my hand and arm is good for training. So I'm not going to set up in my most advantageous position all the time.
So what do you say is the setup? Describe what it is that's weird about it.
Well, you're cranking your leg up on the leg of the table. You're twisting your torso, so it's a naturally uncomfortable setup. First of all, and second of all, it's like both super defensive and super offensive at the same time. Like, you're kind of curled up, so it leaves a little room for your arm to be moved. Like somebody's got to really open you up, right? And then also, because you're so coiled up, you're ready to pull back and go sideways, right? So, I already know, I came in knowing like what wrist flexion and pronation is and all that, because even before coming to your practices, like I had practiced with some other people here and there, right? So I knew, I wouldn't say I knew how to move per se, but I wasn't like a complete beginner, right? So for me, it was really about like what's going on above the arm, or below the arm rather, right? Foot, hips, etc., and how that can contribute to better force expression.
Because usually when you start out, you don't know anything.
Right.
It's
you kind of just grab and you're like,
yeah,
well, why isn't this going anywhere? Right. So luckily I had, watched enough YouTube videos and gotten a chance to practice with people a couple of years ago and intermittently, where it wasn't completely new to me. But that setup was.
So would you say that setup is like the Jerry Cadorette setup? Yeah,
except he launches forward with his shoulder, and you can also do that setup to kind of go back and sideways if you're trying to do a top roll. But I feel like it's still a pretty side pressure heavy top roll. But because you're basically facing the side, it feels like your tricep is way more involved, almost like you're pressing into it, right? Because you're kind of like this, right? Which apparently a lot of people set up for top rolls anyway, whereas I always set up just like squared off,
right?
Which, that's another thing too. It's like if you just do this, you're like considered squared off. It's
right.
Like, that's not squared off.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of
everybody
weird
knows
things.
That's not squared. The refs know that's not squared off, but your shoulders are kind of in the same plane. So
it's like we all agree on a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not, but that aside, I don't always set up that way, because when I set up like actually square, I know it's my arm and hand that have to do all the work.
Right.
Right. Of defending or offending. And I'm not trying to pin people all the time. I'm trying to like get a good workout, learn how to arm wrestle better. And I'm trying to work the weak parts of my game.
Right.
Right. Which big time is my hand.
Right.
So hand and wrist.
Well, yeah. So like, you ever notice how when you watch matches from wherever, because, I subscribe to so many channels that post matches, and sometimes they'll just throw something up, and I'm like, well, where the hell is this from? Like, okay, let me watch it, right? You ever notice how like there'll be a match and a guy will win and a guy will lose pretty easily, where like, that guy fucking lost and he had no chance.
Yeah.
And that guy won and he wasn't gonna fucking lose, and then you'll rewind that match real quick to check their setup. I do this all the time when like I catch something and I'm like, let me see that again. I always see that type of match is exactly what you just said. One guy is fucking totally turned in and tight, and he's going there already in the setup, and the other guy is just like this. And I'm like, that guy's never going to win.
Right.
And he doesn't even know it. The match didn't even start yet. And he's like, and you're like, you had never had a chance.
Yeah.
You know, and everyone knew it. Like the ref knew it. Experienced guys watched it and knew it. And nobody says anything because they're like, watch this. We know how this is gonna go.
It's just like setting up for a lift in the gym, right? Like if you could tell, if you know how to lift from a mile away, someone's about to deadlift, they got their back rounded over, right. They're like breathing in on the way up, like all sorts of weird shit happening, and you're like, that bar is never gonna go up.
Right.
It's the same thing. Now, of course, like when you're arm wrestling, you're going against another human being, not a static object. But still, setup is important, right? So yeah, for me, setup was a huge tip. And I'm still trying to get more and more tips on that because I think there are still big holes in how I'm setting up because there are times that I feel good and times that I feel terrible against the same person. And I'm like, I know I did things differently, but I don't know enough to know what I did differently.
Right.
So I'm trying to still break that down and analyze that. And a big part of it, I think, is which muscles you're engaging because everybody says this, arm wrestling is a static and negative strength sport, right? You're not curling someone across the table. You're holding that position and bringing them down, right? Or even letting go of your angle a little bit. So that kind of brings into question, well, where do I put most of my effort, right? Is it the bicep? Is it the forearm, right? Because you also can't load before the setup, right? You're not trying to take everything. Or
I don't know.
In WL, maybe you are. But like for like stricter leagues, you're not trying to do that. Also, if you're just trying to not be a dick and start off fairly, you're not trying to do that, right? So you're not trying to load too much. But at the same time, there's that static load where you're not pulling into their hand, but you're just tightening up, right? So where do you tighten up, right? And add to that the complexity of this instrument we're using, right? All the muscles in the forearms, all the muscles in the hand, right? Your rotator cuff, your pec, like where you get tight, how you're holding the peg. I mean, all of that can play into this setup. So for me, there's still so much uncharted territory for myself. And I think there's some people that are just naturals at it and they know how to do it. I'm not one of them, as far as I know. So for me, it's I'm still looking for more and more tips on that. And I think basic one is like height, get height, right? That was a big tip for me. I don't remember exactly where I learned it. It could have been on YouTube, but radial deviation. That's something that I told my friend Arif. Right, because he was always grabbing me low. I mean, if he was like strong enough to like just rail me to the side there, but I was like, why don't you just like focus a little bit more on this? And he was like taking my hand, no problem at all, because he's really strong there, right? Which is good for me because then I've got to get my radial flexion stronger too in order to combat his, right?
Right.
But there's more elements to that. There's way more. There's what are your fingers doing? All this stuff. So, as far as tips besides that, I think those are the two.
Well, that's a lot.
Ones.
I mean, look, the setup itself is a huge deal. Like as you were talking, I was thinking about how we're all getting stronger week by week. So that's the cool thing. Like guys like you that come by over a 2-month plus period, like within 2 months, you're going to be way better than you were 2 months ago. That's the beauty of coming to every fucking practice wherever you're going, right? And then as you're getting stronger, if you're practicing with the same guys that you're practicing with are getting stronger. So it may feel like everything's always the same between you, but the difference is just that they're different guys with different strengths, so you know how to handle them as arm wrestlers. So what I think of when you were talking about setup is like when setup is like a game changer is when, let's say you're up against somebody that was always super strong compared to you and they're always getting stronger, but maybe they're getting at the top end of their strength and they're only making micro gains because they're so fucking strong and they've been doing this for years, but you're making bigger jumps because you started from way lower, right? And then maybe one day you grip up with that guy maybe a year or 2 years later, and the difference between you beating that guy and not beating that guy is your setup. So like that's when it's like, that's why setup is important, and for each person, like you said, it's different. Yeah. And it's geared toward your strengths, right? Obviously. And but when you're both just sitting there straight for straight and it's arm for arm, Well, that's the ultimate battle, right? Like,
Right.
there's none of that, like, how do I cheat my way through this? Because,
Right.
as we all know, cheating is allowed in that sense. You need to find all the cheat ways,
Yeah, all the advantages.
just short of a foul.
Right.
And that's how, I don't know, I think that's what makes a smart arm wrestler, is like
Yeah.
figuring those things out.
Yeah, well, I think a big part of any sport or even strength training in general is skill acquisition, not just the physical aspect of getting stronger. And I think in the beginning stages of any activity or sport or whatever, skill acquisition generally outpaces strength gains, right? Like,
Yeah, because
when
you can only get
first
so strong.
Exactly, right? You're only going to put on so much muscle.
In amount of time.
Right. But if you learn to use that more efficiently, you can make huge changes to your game.